Hi, I'm Eason, and welcome back to Metal Monday, where I talk about albums new and old that I recommend you listen to so you can start your week off right. And I know I've been saying old and new a lot, but all I've been doing is covering relatively new albums, so I thought it is time to change that, especially considering the times that we are now living in. Who doesn't want to go back to the good old days when things were a lot simpler, thrash was brand new and still being explored, and John Schaefer wasn't actively participating in an act of sedition? What the fuck, man? I was actually born in one of the golden years of thrash, 1986, and as such, I wasn't really conscious enough to process what was going on in metal at the time. And my experience with metal didn't really pass through Thrashland until very recently, and as such, I have missed out on a whole lot of albums, something that I've been trying to make up for. And in doing so, I started to explore what thrash was like in the late 80s, which brought me to this particular gem. This highly acclaimed 1987 release is the first and widely regarded to be the only release of a particular Canadian thrash band that at one point included none other than Chuck Schuldiner himself. Yes, that Chuck Schuldiner, and it comes highly recommended from a variety of sources, up to and including everybody's favorite cat-loving council member, Fenriz of Darkthrone, who has been including album recommendations in the liner notes of Darkthrone albums for some time now. So without further ado, this is Slaughter's Strappado. Formed in 1984, Slaughter first came upon the scene with their debut demo, Meat Cleaver, and it took them a few more demo releases and one EP release until they finally came up with a full-length album. And I'm using the term pretty loosely because this thing is actually 23 minutes long, which is the average length of EPs nowadays, so, The band was originally a three-piece, except for a brief time in 1986 when Chuck Schuldiner joined the band before leaving them to go on with his other project, the band Death, which we all know how that one turned out. There is some debate as to whether or not Strappado was the band's only full-length release, because some sources list their later release, Fuck Off Death, as the second full-length album that the band has come up with, and other sources regard Fuck Off Death as just a compilation, so I am just going with what I have heard the first time around, which is that Strappado is the band's first and woefully only full-length release to date. Yeah, I know, I can almost hear you saying, yeah, but what does it sound like? Well, Slaughter's sound is basically the illegitimate love child of 80s death metal and thrash metal as it was just starting to gain traction, manufactured through an unholy ritualistic copulation between the two. Even though it contains elements of both and does slide towards one or the other at times, it doesn't neatly fit into either category fully. The music on Strappado is a guitar, bass, and drum show. The riffing on this particular album in terms of speed ranges from mid-pace to extremely fast-paced. I mean, fast-paced enough to actually be borderline grindcore, believe it or not, accompanied by appropriately quick-thinking bass, really aggressive drumming, and vocals that range from throaty, grumbling, really pissed off and thick-ass vocalizations to unhinged screams. Winning formula? Most definitely. But beyond all that, there's one element in Strappado that stands out and stands above everything else, and that, my friends, is the guitar tone, because this thing has the best guitar tone ever devised by man, mainly because it is the thickest, the sharpest, the crunchiest, most deeply fried, the fuzziest guitar tone that you are going to hear this side of classic Swedish death metal. Ever wonder what would happen if Entombed didn't go towards a rock and roll direction and Wolverine blues but decided to play thrash instead? This thing is basically the answer to that. Not that you're going to have much of an opportunity to process any of this in detail, at the very least initially, because when Strappado kicks off, which is immediately after you press play, it kicks off, this thing has one of the fastest openers in history that I have heard this side of grindcore, and coincidentally, the first 3 tracks are the same length as your average grind tracks, which is just 1 minute plus, and by the time the 4th track, Incinerator, rolls along and pulls things to an acceptable upper mid pace, you are just like, anybody get the plate of the truck that just ran me over? In point of fact, this is where one of the primary quirks of Strappado appears, the fact that the first 5 tracks don't really feel like individual tracks, but part of one huge kick-ass track. Strappado kicks things off with unbridled rage, high aggression, and speed. The Curse refines that just a little bit by injecting the tiniest amount of thrash into the mix before Disintegrator rolls along and steamrolls over all of that, bringing the sound closer to death metal and including a 3-second chaos solo of all things to spice things up. By the time Incinerator rolls along with its upper mid pace, its groovier riff, its politically charged lyrics that this guy actually has the time to enunciate now that he doesn't have to trip all over himself trying to regurgitate the lyrics as fast as possible, you don't realize that you have actually passed by 3 tracks and are in the 4th, because Incinerator feels much like the bridge section of this one giant track. It's like as these tracks go along, the music undergoes a process of refinement. It's like Slaughter is just chipping away all the round parts, sharpening the music so they can pierce your sternum better with it. And Parasites basically rounds this up by continuing to indulge in and vibing with the groovy, mid-paced, head-bobbing riff from Incinerator, but also intercutting that with highly aggressive passages that seem to be callbacks to how this album began, bringing this little experiment and linking together tracks to a close, which is where the album runs into a big problem, namely the track FOD Fuck Off Death. Reportedly, this particular song is supposed to be a shout out to Chuck Schuldiner, and if so, not the best idea you've had, guys. FOD is where Strappado comes to a screeching halt. In fact, I would go so far as to say that FOD is what kills Strappado, even though the album picks up immediately after that with faster paced thrash blended with death on Tortured Souls and far purer death metal on Nocturnal Hell. After that point, the album is basically a zombie shambling forward trying to recover from what happened. So what is so wrong with this particular track that I have just labeled it the album killer? Well, let me explain. First of all, FOD is the purest expression of a tendency that the band seems to fall back on across the 23 minutes of this album, which is mid-paced chugging. You see, Incinerator and Parasites after that managed to skirt this particular problem by having liberal amounts of groove in their mix and providing nice extensions of the tracks that came before them. Incinerator benefits greatly from the extremely fast-paced opening of the previous 3 tracks, and Parasites benefits from the intermittent aggression that it provides, but FOD has none of those things. It is just a mindless chug forward. And this wouldn't be so bad if FOD also failed to continue the trend of tracks extending from one another, to the point where I initially had trouble distinguishing that from Parasites when I first listened to it. I was genuinely wondering why Parasites was suddenly on repeat. Furthermore, the album had established a great forward momentum with everything just driving it forward, taking everything to the next level. FOD, the second longest track of this record, just 6 seconds shy of 4 minutes, is content to trudge along with this lethargic little shuffle, just chugging and bringing nothing special to the table. It just kills the mood, man. It just takes you right out of it. Hell, the only thing that FOD actually has going for it is the fact that it has a solo that lasts for longer than 3 seconds and feels really psyched out. And while that is nice, I think the execution could have been a lot better on this track. Furthermore, FOD doesn't reflect all that well on the subsequent tracks either. I mean, Tortured Souls, despite being a very well executed experiment in blending thrash with old school death metal, is basically marred by its proximity proximity to that particular song. It's got some real nice kick syncopation during the faster sections that mostly go by D beats, something that I adore, and its slower sections feel appropriately juxtaposed with the faster ones, creating a very nice experience. And both that and the purer death metal stylings of Nocturnal Hell, as I have said, are tasked with the monumental mission of bringing the album up again. So even though FOD creates some pacing issues, Strappado's pacing is actually very nice, especially considering the fact that this album is just 23 minutes long. The album follows an interesting bell curve. It starts out really fast and aggressive, and instead of constantly ramping that up or pushing it to a certain level of intensity and maintaining it there, it starts to gradually wind down. This trend actually begins in the track Parasites, the tail end of the chain that I mentioned earlier, but then the murder in FOD happens and disrupts the whole wind down process, which doesn't come to full fruition until the closing track, Tales of the Macabre. Ever hear the lines, "This is how the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper" by T.S. Eliot? Well, this is what he was talking about. Tales of the Macabre actually brings the album to a really mellow, really nice, relaxing, easygoing, and extremely groovy conclusion, despite the fact that at the very last stage of it, the song manages to go out with nothing short of an intense, unhinged bang. I know, that sounds like a contradiction, but overall the song is really easygoing, so I don't really count it as a bang. So why am I talking about this album on what is basically a recommendation channel? Like, why am I recommending that you listen to this so you can start your week off right, especially given that I've been ragging on it for the past several minutes? Well, you see, Strappado is far from perfect, which is what makes it perfect. The imperfections that are embedded into the heart of Strappado, much like the imperfections that are embedded into the heart of many a thrash album that came out during this time, where thrash was just this new experimental little genre that people were trying to figure out the rules of, makes it an incredible listen. To be honest, beyond the nostalgia, Slaughter just fucking brings it on Strappado. They bring the riffs, they bring the hard-hitting songs, they bring the aggression, they bring the fast pace, like, they bring everything anyone can ask from a thrash album, and they even add some things that you might ask of particularly an old-school death metal album. So what the fuck more do you want? And especially given the fact that it's 23 minutes and one of the best uses of 23 minutes that you're going to find out there, why not give this one a go? So, you know, if you're a thrash fan, you probably already know this, and if you're just getting into thrash, please add this album to your gateway list, because it deserves a place up there in the pantheon right next to Rain and Blood and Peace Cells and all of that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to provide a Bandcamp link as usual on this one because there is none, so you're kind of on your own on that one, but I am pretty sure that you can find some high quality streams on YouTube or whatever music streaming website that you like using, so why don't you do that, because I really urge you to take a listen. I highly doubt you're going to be disappointed. And if you're a fan of this album, or if you hate it, which I really fucking doubt, by the way, why don't you come back here and tell me what you thought about it in the comments down below. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe, as it always helps. And as always, it's Eason. Peace out.